accidentally drank the invisibility serum. For 3 years, Julian Vance was the only person in the world who could see me. I hid in our house, keeping every corner of it spotless. Until 3 years later, when he started bringing other women home, sleeping with them on our wedding bed. Afterward, he would always kneel before me, crying and begging for forgiveness. Forgive me, Maya. I was just so lonely. I missed the old you so much. I blamed myself. I felt so guilty. Until tonight. It was his victory party, and he was drunk. I overheard him talking to his best friend in the study. What's the rush? I'll give her the antidote when I'm bored of this game. You have no idea. The way she cries while completely naked, it's way more fun than lab research. Only then did I realize. He had the antidote all along. He had never lost the ability to see me. Julian's new biotech project had just won a prestigious global award. By the time he came home from the after-party, it was past midnight. Clearly not drunk enough, he brought his best friend, Marcus, back with him to open a bottle of vintage red wine. I hid in the corner of the dark living room. Marcus poured 2 glasses, leaning back on the couch. Hey Julian, Maya isn't around, right? Julian loosened his tie, a sneer playing on his lips. Her? She's too proud. She knows she's completely naked. Whenever there's another man in the house, she just hides like a stray dog. I froze. I couldn't believe those words came from his mouth. He was the one who told me he couldn't bear the thought of other men seeing me naked. Marcus lowered his voice. It's been 3 years, man. You can't keep her invisible forever. When are you going to? Julian cut him off. What's the rush? I only made her invisible because I didn't want to get tied down by marriage so early. I'll give her the antidote when I'm bored of this. Besides, I do plan on marrying her eventually. The antidote? My heart seized. A cold, suffocating wave rushed through my entire soul. She's so stupid and obedient, Julian chuckled, taking a sip of wine. She believes every single thing I say. I told her that nobody else can see or hear her, so she writes on a notepad just to communicate with me. How could she ever guess that in this entire world, I'm the only one who can see her? Sometimes I just ignore her notes when I'm not in the mood. You should see the look of absolute despair on her face. It's hilarious. And honestly, the way she cries while completely naked, it's way more fun than lab research. Marcus gasped, then let out a low laugh. Dude, you are evil. Back then, you practically tricked her into drinking that serum. She still thinks she drank it by accident and blames herself every day. She really is a fool. But seriously, 3 years? She hasn't suspected a thing. Julian's eyes drifted, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Not at all. In the beginning, I only messed around outside. Now, I bring those girls straight to our bed. A few fake tears and apologies afterward, and she actually thinks it's her fault for not being a real wife to me. Having her watch while I sleep with other women. It's a massive turn on, honestly. The two of them looked at each other and laughed out loud. Every word felt like a poison blade stabbing into my non-existent chest. I didn't drink the serum by accident. And he could always see me. How could I have been so blind? Julian Vance was the golden boy of the scientific community. He invented the invisibility serum. Of course he could easily tweak his own eyes or tech to see me. He kept promising me he was working day and night on an antidote. I waited for 3 agonizing years. I never knew the cure was already sitting in his pocket. My pain, my guilt, my self-loathing, it was all just a sick show for his entertainment. The air in the room felt freezing cold. Not long after Marcus left, the doorbell rang again. Soon a high-pitched, fake voice echoed through the hallway. Dr. Vance, why did you call me over so late? I think you know why, Julian replied smoothly. Within 3 minutes, heavy breathing and moans drifted from the master bedroom. This was the 12th woman he had brought home in the last 2 months. Tonight, it was Chloe Cruz, a struggling Instagram influencer who had recently been blacklisted by her agency. I walked into the bedroom and stood right by the edge of the bed. Julian's eyes locked onto mine. His gaze was precise, mocking, and full of twisted amusement. The woman beneath him groaned, Dr. Vance, you're spacing out again. He didn't answer. He just pushed harder, his eyes never leaving mine. In the past, whenever I felt his gaze lingering on me, I thought I was imagining things. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me because of the isolation. I even thought it was proof of our deep connection. I was wrong. He was just enjoying the thrill of me watching him. It was sickening. I lost track of time, but eventually the noise stopped. Chloe clung to him, whining, Dr. Vance, it's almost dawn. Can't I just stay the night? Please. Julian never let them stay. Once he got what he wanted, he was cold as ice. Get out. Do you have to be so mean? It's not like you have a girlfriend living here anyway. Don't make me say it twice. Defeated, Chloe began putting her clothes back on. Suddenly, her eyes lit up as she spotted something on the nightstand. Can I have this? It was a ring. The diamond ring Julian used to propose to me 3 years ago. The very next day, I became invisible. Julian snatched it away. That belongs to my fiancé. Chloe rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic, Dr. Vance. Your fiancé ran away years ago. Keeping this ring is pointless. Why not give it to someone who's actually here? She tried to wrap her arms around his neck, but Julian shoved her off. You don't compare to her. Get out. Chloe fell to the floor, her face burning with embarrassment. At least I wouldn't pack up and abandon you without a word, making you the laughingstock of the city. I actually appreciate a man like you. I'm 10 times better than she ever was. 3 years ago, Julian told me something. He said the invisibility serum was highly dangerous. If the government or the public found out, we would be hunted down. So, to the rest of the world, I had simply packed my bags and abandoned him. You have no idea how much I adore you, Julian. Chloe tried one last time, climbing back onto the bed to grab the ring. Julian threw her off again, harder this time. Get out. That meant she was officially blacklisted from his house. Julian leaned against the headboard, lighting a cigarette. He clutched the ring tightly in his palm. Maya, are you here? I told you none of those trashy women could ever replace you. The only woman I will ever marry is you. Every time after he finished with another woman, he would pull this loyal boyfriend act. I used to fall for his sweet talk. Even when he brought women home, I blamed myself, thinking my invisibility drove him to this loneliness. I truly believed I was his one and only. Now knowing the truth, I realized what a terrifying actor he was. He wasn't lonely. He was just a monster. Maya, I love you so much. I miss you. Usually at this point, I would write him a long, crying note telling him how much I loved him too. Now I just crouched on the floor, watching him with dead eyes. As his cigarette burned down, a sudden flicker of panic crossed Julian's face. Maya? Just wait for me a little longer. I promise I'll find the cure. I'll make you my wife. I couldn't stand his acting anymore. I walked out of the room. But he didn't care about that brief moment of panic for long. The next day, his life went on as usual. Once my heart turned to ash, I started looking for a way to save myself. He wouldn't keep the antidote at home. It had to be at his lab. But along with the antidote, I needed the raw research data of the invisibility serum. Julian had been a star scientist since his 20s. He had countless inventions. Whether they succeeded or failed, he always kept the raw data. So every time he left for work, I tore through his messy study searching. To keep Julian from suspecting anything, I had to put every paper back exactly where I found it, all while watching the door in case he came back early. It was slow, exhausting work. Suddenly, I heard the front door click. I bolted out of the study. Julian was home earlier than usual. He accidentally kicked over the trash can in the hallway. He looked around the messy house, frowning deeply. Unwashed clothes were scattered on the couch. Dust covered the coffee table, and trash was piled up. Maya? Why haven't you cleaned up the place these past few days? He still pretended he couldn't see me, shouting into the empty air. I didn't reply. He grabbed a pen and a notepad, placing them on the table. Maya, you're not being very good today. Is something wrong? Write it down for me. Looking at his mocking smirk, I spoke out loud. It's been 3 years. Where is the antidote? He almost answered me directly, but caught himself just in time. What's wrong, honey? Write it down. With a cold laugh, I scribbled those exact words on the paper. He immediately put on his trademark guilt-ridden face. I know you're frustrated, and I am too. But science takes time. Invisibility. This is a groundbreaking miracle in human history. Back then, before I could perfect the formula, you accidentally drank my only sample. Reversing it isn't that simple. Maya, please just wait a little longer. I always keep my promises. It was this exact speech that had kept me trapped in guilt for 3 long years. Julian checked his watch. I came home early to let you know that my mentor, Professor Brooks, and my senior colleague, Leo Sterling, are staying over tonight. Make some dinner, and get the guest room ready. Also, clean up this mess quickly. I don't want them laughing at me. If they laughed, they'd be laughing at him. What did that have to do with me? By the time he brought his guests home that evening, the house was still an absolute wreck. Professor Brooks, please come in. Julian stood frozen at the doorway, suddenly too embarrassed to let them step inside. Leo, his colleague, smirked. Wow, Julian. Long time no see, but is this how you treat your guests? Professor Brooks, ever the polite older gentleman, tried to smooth things over. Julian must have been too busy with his research lately to clean up. Julian took the excuse, frantically throwing the clutter on the sofa into his bedroom. Then, thinking of something, he hurried into the kitchen. Of course, I hadn't cooked. Not only that, but the dirty dishes from the last few days were piled high in the sink. The fridge was practically empty. Julian, didn't you say you were going to show off your cooking skills tonight? Professor Brooks asked from the living room. Julian turned around and stared straight at me. I knew he wanted to scream at me. We had started dating in college and moved in together right after graduation. He didn't know how to do a single chore. He couldn't even take care of himself. He grew up pampered, but he once told me, at my age, if I still live with my parents and let them do everything, people will laugh at me. I was an orphan with no friends. He was my entire world. So to let him focus on his brilliant career, I gave up my own promising academic future. I became his live-in maid, never disobeying a single order. Even during these 3 years of being invisible, he wanted to demand why I was suddenly ignoring him. But he had to keep up the act. He whispered into the air, "Maya, are you there?" I just stared back at him, motionless. He was panic-stricken. "Maya, what is wrong with you?" So, this was how it felt to be on the receiving end of being ignored. "Julian, what are you doing in there?" Hearing no response, Leo walked into the kitchen. Julian quickly shut the kitchen door. "I'm so sorry, guys. I've been swamped. There's no food in the house. Let me take you out to a nice restaurant." "Go out." "Julian, I just got off a 10-hour flight. I'm exhausted, and the professor isn't young anymore. You invited us to stay, promising a home-cooked meal. If we knew it was like this, we would have booked a hotel. We have a conference early tomorrow, and we need rest." Julian's face flushed bright red. He had never boiled an egg in his life. He didn't even know how to turn on the stove. "I am so incredibly sorry. It's my fault. Let me order some takeout. It'll be quick." Leo sighed in annoyance. "Fine, whatever. Eating takeout at your place. We might as well have gone to a Hilton." Julian showed them to the 2 guest rooms. They weren't cluttered, but since I hadn't dusted them in days, a thick layer of dust covered the furniture. They had to put on their own bed sheets. The next morning, as they were leaving, Leo was still complaining. The professor didn't say anything, but he looked deeply disappointed. The moment the front door slammed shut, Julian lost his mind. "Maya, get over here right now." I was sitting calmly on the sofa. "What the hell are you trying to do? I told you I haven't made the antidote yet. Why are you throwing a tantrum? Have I mistreated you these past 3 years? Even like this, I still provide you with food and shelter. All I ask is for you to clean the house and cook. It's only been 3 years, and you're already throwing a fit. Maya, with this attitude, I seriously need to reconsider if I even want to marry you." I was genuinely amazed. How could someone say something so disgusting with such a straight face? "I have a conference to attend for the next few days. I'll be staying at the hotel. You better have this place spotless before I get back." That was the only sentence that got a reaction out of me. The moment he slammed the door and left, I ran into the study. Finally, tucked away behind the very back of the bookshelf, I found the complete research files for the invisibility serum. Julian would be at the conference all week. He wouldn't step foot near his lab. This was my only chance. If I missed it, there might never be another. Julian always warned me that going outside while invisible was too dangerous. But I had to risk it. The middle of the night was always safer than the day. At 2 a.m., I stepped out of the front door. For the first time in 3 years, I walked under the open sky. Even though I was invisible, I was acutely aware of my own nakedness. The sheer humiliation made every step feel like walking on hot coals. Thankfully, his private lab wasn't far. The security code hadn't been changed. It was still my birthday. How ironic. I didn't dare turn on the overhead lights. Using a small flashlight, I searched through the dark shelves. My theory was correct. The antidote was hidden right here. Like the serum, it was completely colorless and odorless. That was why I had swallowed it so easily 3 years ago. I dipped a finger into the liquid and touched it to my tongue. Looking down, I watched my hands flicker. Once. Twice. It was indeed the antidote. The taste of the antidote on my tongue was bitter, cold, and electric, like biting down on a zinc coin. I stood in the darkness of Julian's private laboratory, holding my breath as my hands materialized under the beam of the flashlight. For a fleeting 2 seconds, the pale, translucent outline of my fingers, knuckles, and veins flickered into solid, opaque reality before dissolving back into empty air. A tiny, controlled microdose. Just enough to prove the formula was real. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs. But my mind had never been clearer. 3 years of living as an invisible shadow had taught me a terrifying kind of patience. I knew that if I drank the entire vial right now, became fully visible, and walked out the front door, I would lose everything. Julian would claim I had suffered a mental breakdown and abandoned him years ago. He had millions in venture capital, high-priced legal teams, and the global reputation of a scientific prodigy. To the world, I was a missing orphan with no family to file a police report. To the law, I was a ghost. If I wanted my life back, I couldn't just escape. I had to annihilate him. I set the vial back into the cryogenic rack, took out a sterile glass syringe from the cabinet, and carefully drew 3 milliliters of the clear liquid into a small amber sample bottle. I slipped the sample into the pocket of an oversized lab coat hanging on the back of the door. Then I turned my attention to Julian's central terminal. The computer required a dual biometric key, his fingerprint and a 64-character alphanumeric password. But Julian had one fatal flaw that all narcissists share. He believed no human being on Earth was smarter than him. I remembered the summer before I became invisible. We were graduate students at the Institute of Advanced Biochemistry. I had spent 8 straight months deriving the molecular binding coefficients for cellular refractive manipulation. I had filled 3 black leather-bound notebooks with the core quantum resonance equations that Julian struggled to understand. Without my annotations, I typed the root variable of my original thesis into his terminal. \psi_my equals \and \nabla times \math beef underscore \text optic \d \tau. The terminal beeped once. A green prompt appeared on the screen. Access granted. Root level administrator. My breath hitched in my throat. He hadn't even changed the encryption key. He had used my mathematical derivation as the master key to lock me inside his cage. I plugged a high-capacity encrypted drive into the USB port and began cloning the entire directory. As the progress bar crept toward 80%, my eyes scanned the subfolders. There was a folder labeled Project Perseus, Clinical Trials. I clicked it open. My blood turned to ice. There were over 400 high-definition video files, timestamped across the last 36 months. I clicked the earliest one, subject_m_day_001.MP4. On the screen, a younger Julian sat across the breakfast table from me in our old apartment. He was pouring freshly squeezed orange juice into 2 tall glasses. While my back was turned to grab the toast, the video clearly captured Julian pulling a small dropper from his pocket and squeezing 6 clear drops into my glass. He looked straight into his hidden camera, smiling with chilling, psychopathic anticipation. The camera recorded my confusion when my hands began to fade 10 minutes later. It recorded me screaming in terror as my body vanished, sobbing on the floor, while Julian knelt beside me, crying fake tears, holding me, whispering, "Oh my God, Maya, what did you drink? Don't worry, baby. I will spend the rest of my life finding a cure for you." It was premeditated from the very first second. And beside that video was a private patent application filed with the Department of Defense's DARPA Liaison Office, dated 2 weeks ago. Project Perseus. Selective pharmaceutical stealth cloaking for covert assets. Lead inventor, Dr. Julian Vance. Valuation, $140 million. He hadn't kept me invisible just for his twisted domestic game. He had used me as his long-term phase 1 human clinical trial subject, monitoring my cellular degradation, psychological stability, and organ tolerance for 3 solid years, so he could sell my body's data to the highest military bidder for $140 million. $140 million. I whispered into the dark room, my invisible lips trembling with a cold, unyielding fury. The transfer reached 100%. I ejected the drive, tucked the amber vial securely into my coat, and wiped down the terminal with an alcohol pad. I checked the digital clock on the wall. 3:45 a.m. Julian was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the International Bioengineering Summit at the Grand Hyatt Ballroom in 72 hours. "Enjoy your conference, Julian," I murmured into the quiet laboratory. "I'll make sure your presentation is unforgettable." For the next 2 days, I did not leave the house. Instead, I turned Julian's private kingdom into a silent execution chamber. I used his lab toolkit to install 6 microscopic, motion-activated surveillance cameras throughout the master bedroom, the living room, and the study. I hardwired the feeds directly into an offshore cloud server, setting up an automated livestream protocol. When Julian finally returned on Thursday evening, smelling of expensive cologne and airport lounge scotch, he threw his leather briefcase onto the entryway bench with a loud, self-important sigh. "Maya," he called out, loosening his silk tie as he walked into the living room. Silence answered him. The house was immaculate. I had cleaned the dust, polished the hardwood floors until they gleamed, and placed a single, perfectly folded white towel on the edge of the bathroom sink. Julian stopped in the center of the living room, looking around. A smirk of triumphant arrogance spread across his face. "Good girl," he chuckled under his breath, walking over to the bar cart to pour himself 2 fingers of bourbon. "I knew a few days of tough love would straighten you out. You're nothing without me." He sat on the plush leather sofa, taking a long sip of his drink, pulling out his smartphone to dial a number. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction. "Yeah, I just got back from the conference. The DARPA reps were practically drooling over the stage 1 stability data. The contract will be signed right after the keynote gala on Saturday." Marcus's voice filtered through the speaker. "Did you deal with the domestic situation?" "She's fine," Julian laughed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The house is spotless. She spent the whole week scrubbing the floors like a good little dog. Once the defense money hits my account on Monday, I'll synthesize a mild neural stabilizer, mix it with the antidote, and bring her back into the light." A few tears, an emotional wedding at City Hall, and she'll spend the next 50 years thanking me for saving her life. What if she ever remembers the raw data? Marcus asked. She was the one who wrote the quantum resonance paper in grad school. She won't remember a damn thing, Julian sneered, leaning his head back against the leather. I adjusted the final antidote formula. The secondary compound causes severe retrograde amnesia. She'll barely remember her own name from college, let alone the math. She'll just be Mrs. Julian Vance, the quiet, grateful housewife of a billionaire genius. Standing 3 feet away from the sofa, entirely invisible, I held my phone in my hand. The red recording indicator on my screen was glowing brightly. Every syllable, every sneer, every monstrous, calculated admission of fraud and biological kidnapping was encoded in 4K resolution and uploaded directly to the cloud. Marcus, Julian added, checking his luxury watch. Call Chloe. Tell her to come. Over around 10. I need to unwind before the big presentation tomorrow. Chloe? Didn't you kick her out last week? A stray cat always comes back when you dangle a diamond, Julian replied, coldly. Tell her if she behaves herself tonight, I'll buy her that Porsche she wouldn't stop whining about. He hung up, closed his eyes and leaned back, waiting for his mistress. I walked silently to the kitchen, picked up the full vial of the complete antidote from my pocket, and walked out the back door into the cool, dark night. I had no intention of watching his pathetic little show again. My audience was waiting for me tomorrow, at 11 p.m., inside the private room of a boutique hotel 3 blocks away from the convention center. I stood in front of the full-length bathroom mirror. I uncapped the amber vial. The liquid was crystal clear, reflecting the warm amber glow of the vanity lights. For 3 years, I had been an incorporeal entity. I had watched the seasons change through double-pane glass windows I wasn't allowed to open. I had walked barefoot on freezing hardwood floors, terrified of making a sound. I had swallowed the bile of my own humiliation while the man who swore he loved me used my body as a laboratory rat. I raised the vial to my lips and swallowed the entire dose in one long, unbroken draft. The reaction was immediate and violent. A wave of intense, blinding heat swept from my throat into my chest, radiating down my spine into every capillary, every nerve ending, and every cell of my body. It felt like 1,000 needles igniting beneath my skin. I fell to my knees on the bath mat, gripping the edge of the porcelain sink, gasping for air. Breathe, Maya, I told myself, digging my fingernails into the fabric of the mat. Take your life back. Slowly, starting from the tips of my toes, a soft, iridescent shimmer began to coalesce. The pale, creamy pigment of my skin rushed back. The fine lines on my palms, the delicate curve of my collarbones, the dark brown strands of my long hair, cascading over my bare shoulders, they all returned with razor-sharp, permanent clarity. I stood up on trembling legs and looked into the mirror. The face looking back at me was 27 years old. My cheekbones were sharper, my jawline firmer, and my dark eyes held a lethal, unshakable steel that had never existed when I was an innocent graduate student. I wasn't a victim anymore. I walked into the bedroom, where a tailored midnight blue pantsuit, crisp white silk blouse, and Louboutin heels lay waiting on the bed, purchased earlier that day via an anonymous courier. Beside the clothes sat my original academic portfolio from 5 years ago, stamped with the official seal of the National Science Foundation, alongside the encrypted thumb drive containing Julian's complete ruin. I dressed slowly, deliberately, savoring the tactile sensation of silk against my skin, the weight of the silver earrings in my lobes, the firm, grounding clack of high heels against the floor. I picked up my phone and dialed a private, unlisted number. Professor Brooks? I spoke, my voice steady, resonant, and unmistakably alive. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Maya? The old professor's voice trembled with absolute disbelief. Is that really you? Julian told us you left the country 4 years ago. We thought you were dead. I was never gone, Professor, I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips. Was just locked in Julian's basement. And tomorrow morning, I am coming to reclaim my thesis. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom was packed with over 2,000 delegates, Nobel laureates, pharmaceutical CEOs, foreign defense attaches, and international journalists from Reuters, Bloomberg, and the BBC. At 10 a.m. sharp, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium. Distinguished guests, members of the Academy, and honored colleagues. It is our immense privilege to present the recipient of this year's Global Pioneer Award in biomolecular physics, the Chief Executive Officer of Vance Biodynamics, Dr. Julian Vance. The auditorium erupted into thunderous applause. Julian stepped onto the stage, wearing a bespoke Brioni tuxedo, his hair slicked back to perfection, beaming with radiant, narcissistic glory. He adjusted the Lapel microphone with practiced ease, basked in the flashing lights of 50 news cameras, and raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," Julian said, his baritone voice echoing through the acoustic ceiling with absolute authority. 5 years ago, the scientific community told us that true cellular optical refraction was an impossibility. They called it science fiction. But through relentless, solitary dedication, sleepless nights in the laboratory, and an unwavering commitment to human advancement, I derived the Vance refraction theorem. He gestured theatrically to the 70-foot LED display behind him. "Today, I present to you Project Perseus, the world's first stable, human-compatible molecular stealth protocol." Julian clicked his remote control to begin his visual presentation. The screen flickered. A loud, piercing digital screech tore through the concert-grade sound system. The presentation slides vanished. In their place, the massive 70-foot display lit up with crystal-clear 4K surveillance footage from Julian's master bedroom, timestamped last night, 10:45 p.m. On the screen, Julian sat on the edge of his bed, holding a glass of wine, smirking down at Chloe Cruz as she adjusted her lingerie. Julian's amplified voice blasted through every speaker in the auditorium with horrifying, deafening clarity. "She spent the whole week scrubbing the floors like a good little dog. Once the DARPA defense money hits my account, I'll give her the amnesia compound. She'll barely remember her own name from college, let alone the math. She'll just be Mrs. Julian Vance, the quiet, grateful housewife of a billionaire. Genius." The auditorium descended into absolute, suffocating silence. Julian froze mid-breath. His remote control slipped from his fingers, hitting the wooden stage floor with a loud, hollow clatter. What is this?" Julian screamed, waving frantically at the audiovisual booth. "Cut the feed. Turn off the screens. This is a technical malfunction." The technician didn't cut the feed. The video shifted to the recording from 4 years ago. Julian slipping 6 drops of the invisibility serum into my orange juice, grinning into the camera, deriving pleasure from my terrified screams as my body faded into nothingness. Then the screen displayed the side-by-side mathematical proof. My original 2019 doctoral thesis, stamped and notarized by the National Science Foundation, matched line for line, variable for variable, with Julian's groundbreaking patent application. The 2,000 guests in the hall gasped in collective horror. Board members stood up from their tables. The DARPA military liaisons slammed their leather folios shut, their faces dark as thunder. Journalists were already standing on their chairs, broadcast cameras zooming in on Julian's gray, trembling face. "Marcus!" Julian shrieked toward the VIP table in the front row. "Shut it down. Shut it down." Marcus sat frozen, his face drained of all color, staring at the screen where his own voice was recorded laughing about keeping an invisible woman trapped for 3 years. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium groaned open. Every head in the 2,000-seat auditorium turned in unison toward the center aisle. The clicks of my Louboutin heels echoed across the marble floor like the steady, rhythmic tolling of an execution bell. I walked down the red carpet, flanked by Professor Brooks, Leo Sterling, and 4 armed federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Criminal Fraud Division. I wore my midnight blue suit, my posture straight as an arrow, my head held high, under the brilliant glow of the crystal chandeliers. "Julian," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the lapel mic Professor Brooks had pinned to my jacket. "You forgot to credit your co-author." Julian's knees gave out. He staggered backward against the podium, knocking the crystal water pitcher off the stand. It shattered across the stage floor in an explosion of glass and water. "Maya," Julian rasped, his eyes bulging as if he were staring at an avenging angel risen from the underworld. You're visible, you're real." "I was always real, Julian," I said, stopping at the foot of the stage looking up at him with cold, surgical detachment. "You just preferred me when you could treat me like furniture." No. Ladies and gentlemen, this woman is clinically unstable." Julian screamed desperately, pointing a shaking finger at me, turning to the sea of cameras. "She was my research assistant. She stole my early drafts. She went into hiding to sabotage my company." Dr. Julian Vance, the lead FBI agent, announced, stepping onto the stage and pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, intellectual property theft, non-consensual human biomedical experimentation, and aggravated domestic kidnapping." "Get your hands off me," Julian roared, thrashing wildly as 2 agents pinned his arms behind his back. "I am a pioneer. I invented the future. You can't touch me. Maya, tell them you consented. Tell them you drank it by accident." I took one slow step forward onto the stage, looking directly into his terrified, bloodshot eyes. "I didn't drink it by accident, Julian. I whispered, loud enough for every microphone to capture. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, the United States Patent and Trademark Office has officially transferred all intellectual property rights of Project Perseus to the Maya Sterling Foundation. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the cheap engagement ring he had kept on his nightstand for 3 years, and dropped it into the puddle of spilled water at his feet. You're obsolete, Dr. Vance. The agents hauled Julian off the stage. His desperate, incoherent screams echoed down the long hallway, swallowed entirely by the blinding wall of camera flashes and the shouting voices of 200 reporters demanding answers. 6 months later, the maximum security federal psychiatric facility in upstate New York was quiet. During the evening lockdown, Cell 104 was a sterile, padded room with white rubber walls, a single bolted iron cot, and a small, shatterproof glass observation window in the heavy steel door. Julian Vance sat in the center of the floor, wearing an orange inmate jumpsuit. His hair was completely gray at 32 years of age. His body was emaciated, his fingers raw and bleeding from constantly clawing at his own clothes. He didn't sleep. Every few seconds, his head would snap violently to the left, his bloodshot eyes darting into the empty corners of the padded cell. Maya. Julian whimpered, his voice cracking into a dry, hoarse whisper. Are you standing there? Are you watching me? He scrambled across the floor on his hands and knees, swinging his arms through the empty air, trying to catch a phantom. I know you're here. You're naked, aren't you? You're writing on the walls. Stop laughing at me. Stop looking at me. The 2 guards outside the observation window shook their heads, writing on their daily clipboards. Inmate Vance is having his episode again, one guard remarked casually. Severe paranoid schizophrenia with tactile and visual hallucinations. He insists. There's an invisible woman living in his cell 24 hours a day. Poetic justice, the other guard replied, sliding the food tray through the bottom slot. He spent 3 years making someone invisible. Now he's trapped in a room with a ghost of his own making. Inside the cell, Julian curled into a tight fetal ball on the floor, pressing his face against the cold rubber tiles, weeping uncontrollably as the silence of the room wrapped around him like an iron noose, a prison where he would remain the sole, terrified spectator of his own madness for the rest of his days. Spring arrived in Boston with a brilliant, golden warmth that melted the last traces of winter ice from the Charles River. On the top floor of the newly inaugurated Sterling Institute for Advanced Biophysics, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows were wide open, letting in the fresh, sweet scent of blooming magnolias and salty ocean breeze. I stood on the private terrace overlooking the city skyline, holding a cup of hot black coffee. I wore a simple white linen shirt and comfortable trousers, the warm morning sun sinking deep into my skin, warming every muscle, every bone, and every breath of my restored body. Behind me, the laboratory was alive with the quiet, industrious hum of 40 brilliant young researchers, men and women working collaboratively on non-invasive optical therapies to restore sight to blind children. Professor Brooks walked onto the terrace, holding a heavy leather folio. The Ethical Review Board just cleared our pediatric trial protocol, Director Sterling, the old man said, his eyes crinkling with profound paternal pride. No secret patents. No military weaponization. Open source humanitarian distribution across 12 countries. I smiled, taking the folio from his hands, looking out at the glittering blue waters of the river below. Thank you, Professor, I said softly. You look well, Maya, he remarked gently. Truly well. I took a slow, deep, boundless breath of the clean spring air. I was no longer a shadow hiding in the corners of someone else's house. I was no longer an invisible spectator to my own life. I was no longer a secret. I smiled, turned my face toward the infinite, radiant sky, and stepped forward into the brilliant, beautiful light of my own world.